Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Ben Dubose here, Paolo Alves there. Welcome into another episode of The Lager Line, served to you as always courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing. We want to thank our partners at Sports Talk 790 and Rockets Wire for their support as well. With the in-season trade deadline of February 9th coming this Thursday, we've got a special Houston Rockets deadline preview coming your way today. And as we record this Sunday night, well, folks, we've already got some fireworks. Kyrie Irving is now with the Dallas Mavericks. Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, they're headed to Brooklyn, along with some fairly minor draft assets. Brooklyn did get a future first, but it's in 2029, and it's really hard to have any sense of what its value might be that far down the line. And the 2 seconds are of relatively little value in the grand scheme. Anyway, the reason we're talking about this on a Rockets podcast is the fact that Houston's future is intrinsically tied to that of Brooklyn. Of course, it all traces back to the James Harden trade 2 years ago. And by virtue of that deal, Houston controls the first-round draft assets of Brooklyn for the next 5 years, basically through 2027, be it direct pick conveyances, which will be the even years. You already had one of those in 2022 with Tari Eason. And in the odd years, it's swap rights. Generally speaking, what's bad for the Nets is good for the Rockets and vice versa. So whenever there's big news with the Nets, i.e. last summer when Kevin Durant briefly issued his trade demand and we all lost our minds, it's quite relevant to the rebuild in Houston. That's why we lose our minds on days like today. So on today's show, we're going to start by looking at the Kyrie trade and its implications. We will get to some more Rocket-centric discussions regarding what Rafael Stone might do with players on the current roster this week. Eric Gordon, KJ Martin, Jae'Sean Tate. We'll get to that, but I want to lead with the Kyrie Irving stuff because, well, first off, it actually happened. That deal is agreed to, according to basically every major newsbreaker in the business, and there's a number of implications, both short-term and long-term, potentially for the Rockets from this Kyrie Irving to Dallas trade. Let's start with the short term because I think that's going to go fairly quickly. In my opinion, it doesn't change a whole heck of a lot with regards to this season. You've made this point on Twitter at Paolo Alves NBA, where you're a great follow. Of course, I'm on there at Ben Dubose. Brooklyn is not suddenly a much worse team than they were yesterday. They're bigger now. They're also deeper. There's a lot more athleticism, a lot more length. They do certainly lose the shot creation ability of Kyrie Irving. And let's not mitigate. There's some advanced metrics that still have him as a top 10 player in the league. He's not Kevin Durant. He's not in that true top tier alongside Nikola Jokic, Giannis, Luka. He's not quite at that level with KD and LeBron, but he's still a top 10 to top 20 player, an elite shot creator. But he is a bit on the small side. He doesn't bring you a ton defensively. You are getting longer with this trade. You are getting better defensively. You do have a second-year guard in Cam Thomas who can perhaps step up and fill some of the shot-creating void. We saw him score 44 points in that come-from-behind win for the Nets yesterday. And at least in the short term, I would not be shocked if Kevin Durant at least is willing to give this a shot if all of a sudden the Nets rally around this. Again, it's not unprecedented for a team to sort of go into nobody believes in us mode. And in this case, Kevin Durant's one of the best players in NBA history, and people are counting him out. And this is a fairly deep cast of role players that, in theory, should fit pretty well around a nearly 7-foot playmaker like Kevin Durant. That's one of the best big man shooters that we've ever seen in basketball. So in terms of the very short term, it doesn't really change Brooklyn's outlook that much. Now, you can point out certainly that without Kyrie Irving, they don't have the upside of a second star. But honestly, I don't think that they were at the level of the top teams in the East anyway, in terms of Boston, Philadelphia. Who am I forgetting? I suppose you could argue Miami is up there.
The Cavaliers.
The Cavaliers are up there. Did I mention Milwaukee? Yeah, Boston, Milwaukee, Philadelphia. Those are the big three, I think. You could also throw in the Cavaliers. I think the Nets, at least relative to Boston, Milwaukee, and Philly, were a step behind to begin with. So while I do think that maybe the odds of an upset are less now without Kyrie, without that second shot creator, that second potential star level player, or a guy who in 2016 hit the biggest shot on the biggest stage to win the NBA Finals, at the same time, that was sort of unlikely for Brooklyn this year anyway. So I don't think it really changes their outlook all that much this season. And in terms of the swap right, look, let's be real. That was extremely unlikely no matter what to benefit the Rockets this year because, of course, the Rockets still have the worst record in basketball. They're rebuilding. I suppose there's still a small chance that the Nets could fall to the play-in tournament. And then if they lose in the play-in tournament, then, they would have like a 1 or 2% shot of getting one of those lottery picks and an even less percent than that of actually jumping ahead of the Rockets. I suppose that, if you want to squint hard enough, maybe you can make the case that now the Nets fall to the play-in tournament. There are some decent teams in the middle of the East, Cleveland, Miami, maybe, New York or Atlanta gets going in the second half. But honestly, the odds of that are just so small that from a Rockets perspective, I find it really worthless to spend much time on that angle. The other short-term implication that I've seen speculated about the last couple of days, should the Rockets have gotten involved in these negotiations, be it for Kyrie directly or as a facilitator? And of course, now we can talk about it in the past tense because the deal is agreed to, it's done. In my opinion, the answer is clearly no. This was not a missed opportunity for Rafael Stone. The reason we talked about the Rockets getting involved in talks with the Nets last summer was because if the Nets truly blew up, then those future Brooklyn assets that the Rockets own, first rounds through 2027, they're disproportionately valuable to the Nets because they want the failsafe of, if things go bad, at least we have our first round pick. Right now, they don't have that. That puts them in a very precarious position. And if they were looking at a rebuild, which they would have been if Kevin Durant was going to leave, which he tried to do last summer, then yes, those picks, those assets that the Rockets own would be disproportionately valuable to the Nets. And so there's a market inefficiency there that Rafael Stone should at least explore. Whereas in this case, losing Kyrie Irving is not to that magnitude. He's very, very good, but for the reasons we just talked about, it doesn't really change Brooklyn's outlook in the short term. I don't think they're a championship contender, but number one, I don't think they quite were before. And as long as they have Kevin Durant, they have every single year, assuming health, which he's injured now, but it's not a long-term injury, at least we don't think it is, they should be competitive. Kevin Durant is just that valuable by himself. So those future Brooklyn assets, just not really, that market inefficiency isn't there in Kyrie Irving trade talks the way it would have been for Kevin Durant, and perhaps it will be in the future. We'll get to that. The other angle that I think is worth noting, or at least touching on briefly, some people will point out, look, the Rockets could have up to $60 million in cap space this summer. We know point guard is a position that has certainly been an issue for them this year. Kyrie Irving is only 30 years old. Why don't the Rockets go after Kyrie themselves? The answer to that, even if you put all his baggage aside, because of the collective bargaining agreement, Kyrie Irving cannot sign a 4-year extension, which is what he wants, according to all reports, a 4-year max deal. This is probably his last chance to get one, and he knows it. He cannot sign it right now. He can only sign it in free agency, and you're a fool if you put 100% of your trust in Kyrie Irving, even if he says, hey, wink, wink, I will re-sign with you over the summer. Guess what? He said plenty of things with the Nets and the Celtics. Circumstances changed with Kyrie. That would be, even if Rafael Stone was bullish on Kyrie as a player and really wanted him, that would be absolutely foolish. The only reason that you would consider giving up assets in the short term would be if you're a team like Dallas that puts value on this season. Dallas hopes that by combining Kyrie and Luka that they can actually make a push this year. So even if things go haywire and Kyrie leaves, well, you know what? You still have the value of seeing what can happen, taking a swing this season with those two high-scoring guards. For the Rockets at 13 and 40, this season is already gone. There is no value in that. If you want Kyrie Irving, you can still go after him in free agency because he's going to be there. So for the Rockets, there was no reason to pursue Kyrie unless an extension would come as part of the trade, and that's just not realistic, assuming he wants a 4-year deal by the CBA. So even if you wanted Kyrie, it doesn't make sense for the Rockets to do it now. This summer would be the time. And then in terms of being involved maybe as a facilitator, I just don't really see the market inefficiency because, again, Brooklyn is not at the point, as long as they have KD, those future picks aren't disproportionately valuable to them because they can still expect to be competitive as long as Kevin Durant is on that roster and bought in. So for now, that window is not open. It might open in the long term. We'll get to that. But in the short term, both in terms of Brooklyn's team on the court and any opportunities with, the trade talks, I don't think it really changed that much, and I don't think the Rockets really missed an opportunity here. Am I missing anything?
I actually, usually I'm the one with the hottest take or the more extreme take. I actually think, going back to your initial point about the short-term implications on the court for Brooklyn, I don't think that this takes the Nets like that much further down than what you would expect them to be. But I did see them as a championship contender before with Kyrie.
Okay.
Mostly because what we saw last year from Brooklyn in the playoffs is if you force KD to be a playmaker, that's his weakness. And that's been his weakness since all the way back to the Golden State days. That's why the Rockets would rather let KD cook than let, anybody else cook. And so I see, and I saw Kyrie as someone who could be that secondary playmaker, and it didn't work last year in the playoffs. But I think with some better coaching, that Kyrie was part of the solution to that. You do still need a star playmaker, and I did see, and before KD got hurt, they were on pace to be a top 2 seed fighting with Boston for that top spot. And when you look at the seasons that guys like Nick Claxton are having, and just random, diamonds in the rough that they found, Cam Thomas, even they found roles for Utah Watanabe and guys like that, typical, contending team stuff. I actually thought that they were a contender, and I thought I thought at the very least KD could sell themselves on, okay, we have a chance of winning a championship. I think after the trade, it's just typical trade a star for 2 role players, which, to be fair to them, both Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie are pretty great role players. I had imagined the trade between Dallas and Brooklyn for Kyrie, and I had placed the value of Kyrie considering the situation and considering he had just asked out. I thought just Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie, perhaps a couple of seconds, or perhaps maybe I thought the haggle would be to try and get Josh Green involved because he's having a career year. He's a great, plug and play 3-and-D wing. I thought that would be, kind of the price point, and they ended up getting that plus a unprotected first round pick in 2029, which, if you're dealing with the Mavs, that's basically the most valuable pick that they could possibly give you, because that's as far out as possible for the eventuality that Luka Doncic might ask out eventually or leave, right? And so you could catch them in a rebuilding cycle 7 years from now.
I will say, by the way,
Yeah.
some of the recent trades like Gobert for 4 firsts, I think some of these future firsts, the market has gotten so skewed that it would have been very difficult for them to get nothing. I think it's one of those where now that's sort of set the bar to where, in this case, getting just 1 first, I know what you're saying, like on paper, it feels like a good deal. In some respects, it might even be considered underwhelming. I think the market has just sort of shifted on those future firsts based on teams being willing to sort of unload everything they have in these star trades.
Yeah, perhaps I need to adjust my judgment on that a little bit, or at the very least on the value of these, late in the future picks. Because for me, I typically value, if you're trading with a contender, I typically value picks as far out as possible.
Yeah,
it's more
better
valuable
than
short. Yeah. But you could also make the argument that a pick on the shorter term will, if it's a good draft, trading a pick in the year of the draft, if it's a good draft, will naturally increase the value of it. But to as I was saying, to Spencer Dinwiddie's credit, he is putting up 18, 3, and 5 on 41% from 3. That's not a mistake. He's having a career year. 82% from the line. He's having a career year. Dorian Finney-Smith just got extended, and so he's going to be making 13 million next year, 14 afterwards, 15 on a player option. He's actually having a down year, He's still, a PJ Tucker type, a 3-and-D wing. He's still shooting 36% from three. He's still a very good defender. But those are pretty quality role players. So I think you're increasing the floor of the team and you're decreasing the ceiling, which for the Rockets isn't all that great because ideally you'd want the floor to be as low as possible if you have the team's picks. But I do think that this makes a difference as far as KD goes, which is what I think will happen if they reach the postseason and are a first round or second round exit. I think before the Kyrie trade, I would have them above. I would have them beating at least Cleveland. I would have them beating. I'd have Philadelphia as a close series. Perhaps Milwaukee, not really sure. Depends on how good the matchup goes between Giannis and Nick Claxton. I know in some of their regular season matchups, Claxton has done a pretty good job on Giannis. So it would be, it's a playoff series. It would be down to the wire. I think without Kyrie, I don't have them beating Milwaukee. I don't have them beating Philly. I don't have them beating Cleveland, and I don't have any of the any series. Even perhaps with Miami, I don't have any of these series going even 6 games, let alone 7. So I think there's a clear downgrade there, and I know we'll get into the long-term implications in a little bit. But I also wanted to touch a little bit on just the trade in itself. I thought was pretty good value by the Nets. I thought that they were in a worse negotiating position than what they apparently were.
Sean Marks is a good GM.
He is, for sure. And I think they also sort of surprised me, but not that much in the type of package that they chose, in that they went with this package because these were the 2 best role players that they could have gotten. And I don't think it's particularly close. If you went to the Clippers, I don't think you're getting better than this in terms of actual talent. If you go to the Lakers, you're clearly not getting better than this in terms of actual talent. So it's interesting in speaking of this deadline, to not go too far into the future. I wonder if they'll make more moves this deadline, because it feels like, considering that they already had some, diamonds in the rough, gems gotten for very low prices because they're a contending team, like contending teams do. It now feels like the team is perhaps maybe too deep. Because there's a lot of guys that are talented and they could be playing a role going forward that won't get a chance to, because you just added 2 guys that are going to play 25 to 30 minutes a night guaranteed.
Yeah.
And then from the Rockets' perspective, I think it's good that this is the first domino to fall. I think last offseason we kind of took for granted that a trade request just materializes eventually, and I guess that did happen to some extent with Kyrie just 6 months later.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, even when he requested the trade, I wasn't sure the Nets were going to deal him, and the Nets actually dealing him might not mean much on the court right now. But I think for a guy like Kevin Durant, like KD, it will eventually matter. And I think we already saw KD talk about his teammates and say, well, he's had some controversial statements when it comes to kind of undervaluing the contribution of role player teammates, and he totally seems like the kind of guy that will think of it as it was me and Kyrie, we were the stars, we were going to carry this team, and now it's just me. And I don't think Spencer Dinwiddie is changing any of that. And from the perspective of how could the Rockets gotten involved, perhaps in this trade, I think there was something to be said if the partner for this trade were a team like the Lakers, whose package would have been, pick based, and then considering that if the Nets wanted to have their cake and eat it too, they could have gotten perhaps the package from the Lakers and then flipped Russell Westbrook for a role player, or flip Russell Westbrook to Charlotte for I don't know Terry Rozier and came to the Rockets to get Eric Gordon, for example, or perhaps the Lakers using the large salary of Russell Westbrook could have gotten. I had this trade on my Twitter profile yesterday. They mathematically could have gotten sent just Russ and Patrick Beverley away. Obviously, Pat Beverley coming to the Rockets as a vet. They could have theoretically gotten both Joe Harris, Kyrie Irving, and still fit Eric Gordon into that framework. So if it were, something like that, I could have seen the Rockets getting involved. From the perspective of getting Kyrie Irving, it just doesn't make any sense. As you say, you laid out all the CBA stuff. It makes sense for teams like the Mavericks or the Lakers to give up real assets for Kyrie Irving, because They have current stars on the roster. They're ready to compete right now. And
This
even
season matters.
Yeah, this season matters. And even just one playoff run with Kyrie Irving, if it turns into a title, and Kyrie Irving is a pretty big swing on your title odds for just one championship run, because you can't deny the talent. He's a very good player. For the Rockets, who are aiming to get better next season but have no ambitions this season, it could very well just be giving up an asset or assets for a guy that's going to be here 3 months when you're not trying to compete and leave for nothing in the offseason. So it just never really made sense as a third team, perhaps, but considering that the Nets chose the Mavericks and the Mavericks already have the ready-made role players to send to Brooklyn that they would have wanted, it just doesn't really make much sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think if Brooklyn was trying to position themselves for a rebuild, there might have been a window in terms of, getting involved with one of your future assets from Brooklyn, but this was clearly a plug and play. They're trying to still salvage things with Kevin Durant. That's what this move, in my opinion, should signify. At least for this year, they're going to give it a run, and maybe, you never say never. Perhaps it's, 2011 Dallas reincarnated with, a 34-year-old KD doing what a 33-year-old Dirk did 12 years ago. Somehow the perfect storm of, a one-star team with just, role players that fit ideally. To me, this signifies that, I guess we'll never know until Thursday. Who knows if Kevin Durant asks out again? Will they stand up to him again the same way they did last summer? But I think it makes it pretty clear that Brooklyn's not thinking about those future picks just yet. They are prioritizing the short term. They're getting plug and play guys. And if anything, as you mentioned, they may make more moves this week to upgrade the short term, because all of a sudden they've got a deep roster to deal with. You could see them doing a consolidation trade to further bolster their roster around Kevin Durant for this season. And while it's relatively unlikely, it's at least still possible. I think that's the focus. The other thing, I personally would be surprised if Durant issues a trade demand this week, simply because he hasn't had the time, unless this has been going on behind the scenes for a lot longer. At least in terms of what we know, this feels very, very sudden. I mean, before Friday, no one was even talking about this as a possibility. The Nets, prior to KD's knee injury, actually looked really good. It seemed to be really clicking for them. I still don't think they were quite at the level of Boston or Milwaukee or even Philadelphia, as we were saying earlier, but they looked very, very good. So with this happening so abruptly, and the fact that it's just very hard to match Kevin Durant's $45 million salary, and basically everybody's at or above the salary cap right now, I just don't know where he could reasonably go in the next 3 days. Who could put together a package that makes sense? I know Chris Haynes has reported that, if Durant comes available, the Suns will try and pursue him. They were on his list last summer. Quite frankly, I wonder if they would still be on Durant's list today. The Suns are barely over 500. Chris Paul appears to be in some form of decline. Of course, they'd likely have to give up a ton to Brooklyn in that trade. So I'm not sure if Phoenix would still check the boxes right now the way they would have last summer. To me, the more likely scenario is Durant just letting the last 30 games of this regular season play out, and then revisiting the situation in the summer. He can see what happens in the playoffs, and there's just going to be a lot more options. Some teams have cap space as well. It's just a lot more likely to see the kind of major movement. Whereas right now, unless there's something going on behind the scenes that we're just totally unaware of, it's tough to see, I guess, number one, who's really available, and number two, what a deal would look like that would reasonably satisfy Brooklyn. It just seems like the easiest play is just to band-aid their way through this season, which is what it looks like the Nets are doing, and for both the Nets and KD to revisit the situation over the summer. That's where, in my opinion, it gets really interesting. And now we'll transition to the longer term component of this, because this is where the Rockets could get involved. Again, those future assets that the Rockets own from Brooklyn, I don't think they're disproportionately valuable to the Nets now, because as long as they have KD and a lot of veterans around him, which they do, they're going to be competitive. It's not like they desperately need the fail-safe of, well, if things go poorly, then we need our future draft assets to protect us. As long as you have KD and he's healthy, then you're going to be okay. Whereas if Kevin Durant is the guy who, even at 34 years old, he's still a top 5 player, he is still an all-time great, he's that good, then all of a sudden those picks become a lot more tempting to the Nets, because they have to look in the mirror and at least account for the possibility that, hey, we could be really, really bad. This could go the way things went for the Rockets after trading James Harden in early 2021. That's a possibility that Sean Marks would have to prepare for. So if Kevin Durant and the Nets flame out in the first or second round, it's going to be tough for KD. And even though he has 3 years left on his contract, look, a guy of his stature, we've seen this over and over again. Those guys typically get their way. And I know you can point out that, well, he didn't last summer. But again, I think there'll be more suitors. He'll also have a bit more leverage with one less year on his contract moving forward. The odds are he can probably get what he wants, especially if he pushes harder.
He'll be more desperate as well, because last year he stayed with Kyrie. If he's staying without another star, I mean, he wasn't willing to boycott to do what James Harden did, to boycott workouts or just miss games or not
There's
try.
Another level you can go to.
Yeah.
And the reason I think he'll get to that level, and this is where losing Kyrie really hurts. Kyrie was a guy who could call him up on the phone. They could FaceTime. They could look each other in the eye, and there was mutual respect. Kevin Durant looked at him as a player who maybe not quite at his level, but pretty damn close. Legitimately an all-star level player every single year who has performed on the biggest stage. Brooklyn has a good roster now, but there is no one on that roster who is anywhere near Kevin Durant's level. So perhaps I shouldn't say that, he doesn't respect them. That's a bit harsh, but there's no one that Kevin Durant looks at as a peer. And so I think a year ago, there was always a possibility that, Kyrie Irving could call him up on the phone. They could go out. They could look each other in the eye and say, you know what, let's give this a chance. And there's someone that Kevin Durant would feel comfortable going to war with and saying, no matter what, if I've got this guy with me, I've got a chance in the top heavy NBA that's dependent on stars. He doesn't anymore. There's not that one guy on the Nets who could make that call and instantly command the level of respect that Kyrie Irving did as a basketball player. And I think that's going to be a big difference, assuming they lose in the first or second round of the playoffs. You're not going to have that possibility on the Nets end that they can have their other star make the call and say, hey, let's give this one more run. There's just not going to be that type of presence on the roster anymore. And I think that's a big deal. Also, stars attract stars. We've seen that time and time again in the NBA. And so even if it wasn't quite enough with Durant and Kyrie, you were always theoretically one star from having a big three again. We know things didn't quite work out, the chemistry when they had James Harden. But if you had KD and Kyrie, it was always, at least a possibility that some other star could try to force his way to Brooklyn. Right now, I don't think Brooklyn is that desirable of a situation. I don't think it's terrible, but I just don't think that you have a disgruntled star that probably wants to win a title that's thinking, man, if I can just force my way to Brooklyn, I just don't think they're at the top of that list anymore. It is what it is. So I think for all those reasons, it's a lot more likely for Kevin Durant to want out this summer and to push harder than he did a year ago. And if that's the case, the Rockets, be it as a facilitator or even trading for Kevin Durant, yes, I know he'll turn 35 years old later this year. The Rockets should explore it, because when you're building a team and you're trying to be the best out of 30, it's really hard. You're looking for market inefficiencies. This is a market inefficiency. Now, that's not to say you do a trade no matter what. Again, maybe for whatever reason, the Nets are just hell-bent on, no matter what, just staying relevant to be relevant. And if they're, willing to swallow just mediocrity treadmill with no real upside, and, hopefully just by surviving the New York market, maybe you eventually attract a star the way, sort of the Knicks blueprint heading into, the
last 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say leading into the Carmelo Anthony trade from 13 years ago, whenever that was. I guess they can. But if the Nets act what, in my opinion, is the smart thing, if they go on the right path, which is to give themselves optionality, then those picks are valuable to them, and the Rockets should at least explore that market. And, I'm sure some will want to look more as a facilitator, because of course the Rockets right now are one of the youngest teams in the NBA. And so it may make more sense to use Phoenix as an example to try and help facilitate. And maybe, you get a Bridges type that can slot into your young core. But I don't think you can turn down Kevin Durant either, because if there's one thing that I think is really telling about the current Rocket situation, it's that veterans do matter, especially veteran star players. It's not like you can just roll out a lot of young talent, which the Rockets already have, and then everything magically develops perfectly. That's why we've talked about in the past about the Rockets potentially going after James Harden in free agency. And of course, there's a relationship between Kevin Durant and James Harden, and perhaps it makes it all the more likely you can get James Harden if you're able to get his buddy Kevin Durant. Does that necessarily make you a contender? I don't know, but it certainly makes you relevant. And where I think a lot of people on Twitter are sort of misguided on this, so much of it is, well, the Rockets are the worst team in the NBA right now. Even if you add, a 33-year-old Harden and a 34-year-old KD, or I guess next year they'll be 34 and 35, then does it make you a contender? And I don't think it's quite that binary, because it's not just about what you do next season. It's also about how you develop the young guys you have in place. And yes, I 100% do believe that marquee players like Kevin Durant and James Harden make the game much easier and much better from the standpoint of development on a day-to-day basis than what the situation currently is. I think it's pretty clear that the Rockets are suffering from not having that type of infrastructure. We've had guys like Austin Rivers talk about it all year long. Kevin Durant and James Harden are all-timers. They are legends. They're future Hall of Famers. They're two of the greatest players that have ever played. I don't think that just because they're not on your ideal time frame of, well, even if you add these guys, are you for sure a contender next year? And I wouldn't quite say no, because the NBA, there's a lot more parity. This is not the league of LeBron and the Heat, KD and the Warriors. There is more parity now. We've seen teams like Memphis and Sacramento take a much quicker rise up the standings than people thought possible. But even if we say that, hey, serious contention the next couple of years, no matter what, is off the table, I'm not willing to say that makes that path not worthwhile, because if those guys are open to it, and they might not be, again, it's not like the Rockets are a traditional contender or anything close to that, but who knows? If you can get both of those guys, maybe they're willing to sort of take a leap of faith on those two guys together again. And with, say what you will at the record now, but there's definitely some young talent. We've heard Kevin Durant actually go out of his way to praise guys like Alperen Sengun, Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green. Who knows what the roster would look like after all those dealings, of course, but my guess is at least, one or two of those guys would still be there. Again, I just don't think it's as simple as saying, well, the Rockets shouldn't even consider KD because of his age and because of the fact that, they're probably not ready to contend even if you get him next season. No, there's clear benefits, even if he doesn't take you to a contending level, just from what he could mean for the young guys you're trying to develop, to jolt you back to relevancy, to make the game so much easier for these types of young prospects that you're trying to get better. Again, that's probably a far-fetched scenario. I don't want to paint the picture that it's likely, but I do think it's something that, again, the Rockets should at least keep an open mind to. And who knows if James Harden and Kevin Durant make calls to one another behind the scenes, and maybe they're looking at places that they could conceivably get to. It's hard for me to think of another scenario where both of those guys could get to this summer between, do they have the cap room? Do they have the trade assets? The Rockets do. The Rockets have the cap room. They've got the trade assets that are disproportionately valuable to the Nets. I think it's worth exploring. And maybe it's nothing that big. Maybe it's just as a facilitator. But again, it makes sense for Rafael Stone to look wherever there's market inefficiencies. This is one. And then in terms of, actually going after KD himself, as crazy as that might sound, with KD being 34 years old and the Rockets being the worst team in the league, again, it's not just about contention. There are so many other benefits when it comes to shaping your future that would come from having guys like Kevin Durant and James Harden around. Everything we've talked about in the past with having James Harden and why that could be a value this summer, the same applies to Kevin Durant as well. So I would be open to it. Again, I think it's a long shot, not saying by any means that I think it's likely, but I just think, be it as facilitator or even trying to trade for KD, I would not rule it out. Paolo, your thoughts?
Interesting. I think you made a lot of good points, and I wanted to suggest a little game, or a little back and forwards. I have a few scenarios in my head of how this could pan out involving the Rockets this summer. Before I do, I just wanted to reiterate that I don't think KD stays past this summer. I think he has more leverage. I think because he has one less year of contract, I think he has more urgency to do it. He's going to be 34, going on 35, playing the best basketball of his career. He is someone who has gotten, significant injuries for several weeks at points over the last 3 seasons. There's no signs of that slowing down, as unreal as his body type seems to be when it comes to just recovering, because he hasn't lost a step. You could argue that he's better than he was in his prime.
Also, by the way, modern medicine and sports science is improving across the board. I mean, that's why we see LeBron James still doing what he's doing at 38. Why, I know it's a cross-sport comparison, but Tom Brady lasted into his mid-40s. Now, I know the athleticism requirement for an NFL quarterback, that's the same as an NBA. But I'm just saying, in general, modern medicine and sports science has come a long way. So I think some of the aging curves that fans think of, those may be stretching out a little bit.
Yeah. That being said, I'm not, a lot of people taking victory laps on Twitter, a lot of people, overreacting. I think it's a big step. This is not the dream yet. The dream is when KD asks out. Well, not when he asks out, when he actually gets traded. To me, that's when the dream comes true. That's when you can wave your flag around, say Rafael Stone's a genius. It's looking better for sure, but that's where you can, say the Rockets fleece the Nets. We are in an unbelievable position going forward.
Yeah,
That hasn't
and by the
happened
way,
yet.
yeah, and by the way, one thing I should have added, and I'll add it right here. Some will say, well, why would you bail the Nets out? Just let them be bad. Well, the thing is, the Nets being bad, they have a choice not to. In fact, if they don't own any of the draft assets, they have no incentive to be bad. So they could easily, if the Rockets aren't willing to play ball, just do the Knicks plan, as we talked about, to just sort of trade Durant for basically $1 for 4 quarters, stay relevant. Is it the best plan? No, but again, they don't have their picks, so there's no incentive to be bad. And it is not that hard in the NBA to be mediocre if you try. It's really not. Most of the teams that are bad, they are doing it with tanking in mind. They are going out of their way not to have veterans, the way the Rockets are this year. I just think that sometimes when the discussions on Twitter start talking about this scenario, people are like, well, why bail them out? Just let them be bad. It's not as easy to be like, people just have this vision of it then turning into like a top 3 pick and just getting like a crazy good asset. It's honestly not that hard for the Nets to sort of stay afloat and be mediocre, because Kevin Durant will get you a lot of, short-term asset capital if you want it in terms of players. You do have to consider that. It's not like the Nets all of a sudden, well, if you don't help them, they're just going to be really awful. There's a world where they just stay afloat. And so that's why the Rockets, they can't not consider it. They have to be sort of open-minded to the idea that there's something that they can lose to.
Yeah, and so let's get into the scenarios that I was going to bring up. I think the first one, I think 2 of them actually were brought up by Jackson Gatlin, from the host of LOR. I'm sure everybody knows who he is.
Locked on Rockets, yep.
Yeah. He brought up, which is the first scenario that I'm going to bring up, which is the one you touched on, and kind of segueing into it, which is trading for KD, giving the Nets their picks back for KD in specific. And I actually have, I have put some thought into this, and I actually have kind of a mapped out plan of what I would do in each situation. So if it's in a situation where James Harden, who is a free agent, he's saying, hey, if you go and get KD, I'll sign there, and we'll do this, and we'll try to be a contender, and you get to have your cake and eat it too. Once again, I used this earlier in the episode, in the sense of you have KD and Harden, so you are guaranteed to be a contender. At the same time, you have a lot of guys on rookie deals that are going to be gaining a lot of experience. Because if we're being honest with ourselves, the Nets getting their picks back, that's something they can, as you said, a market inefficiency, that's something they can only get from the Rockets. They give the Rockets one of the most, powerful negotiating positions you could ever imagine. They have something that no one else has that directly affects the course of what the Nets can do. It's not the same as if if someone has an asset and it's trying to trade for a star and there's like a couple of options, you could trade for Donovan Mitchell or Rudy Gobert. No, there is no other team that can give the Nets their picks back and allow them to tank. So I actually think that to get KD back, even with 3 years left on his contract, I would expect that giving the Net, and doing the 3 swaps and giving them back their 2 picks, which amounts to 5 years of pick control, that plus one of our guys, I don't even think you need 2, one of our prime assets, which is either Jabari Smith, Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, or our pick next year. Obviously, we'll get into it. Or our pick next year. I think that's enough to get them to give us KD back.
Oh, you mean this coming summer? Yeah.
Yeah, this summer. I think that's enough to get them to give us KD, and I think you have to involve Devin Porter Jr. in the deal, which I think the Nets will actually welcome, because if they're going to a rebuild, KPJ, can be someone that they can, give even more time to as they go through that process. And he'll be an asset as well on that contract that they can later flip, and that's usually what teams do when they're trying to tank. In that scenario, yes, I would do it. I would trade for KD. I would give them their picks back, and I would give them one of these prospects. If it's James, and I'll make an argument that's a little bit of a hot take as well. In this scenario, actually, I would probably rather give them Sengun than Jabari or Jalen, even though I think Sengun's the better prospect than Jabari, and it's up there with Jalen. Mostly not because Klingon can fit with these guys. Klingon can very well fit with these guys. He can even enhance them a little bit. It's just that if you have James Harden on your team and Kevin Durant on your team,
Only so many touches.
there's only so many touches, and you're going to be. It's not that he can't play with them; he can, but it's just a poor allocation of resources. If you have two premier shot creators, and you still having Jalen Green on this team, it just makes more sense to perhaps give up Klingon, who is a better asset than Jabari Smith, I think, right now.
Yeah.
And perhaps get back Nick Claxton, for example, who's a perfect fit with this type of team construct as he's shown this year. And perhaps you save, a swap or something, right? Perhaps because you're giving up Klingon, who is the better prospect and who is someone who the Nets can bring back as the centerpiece. Because if the Nets are bringing back Jabari Smith Jr., he's no, they can't just give him the ball and have him put on an entertaining product for their fans, the big New York market, right? Klingon is someone who they can bring in. Hey, this guy's a centerpiece. We're going to let this guy cook every night. Klingon can very well do that, and he'll probably turn into a star there. So that's probably what I would do, which would pain me because I'm riding high on the Klingon hopium right now,
Right.
but that's probably what I would do. So, but the first scenario to lay it out is Harden says, "You go get KD, and I'll sign with you, and we'll take it from there." I'm also not demanding that you go get a third star, but we'll try to win a championship as these guys are growing. And I think if you have KD and Harden with guys that are as complementary as Star Eason is, KJ Martin is, Jabari Smith is, if he can get his shot back. I think that's a championship contender right away.
Yeah.
In that scenario, what are you doing? Are you going after KD? Are you not?
I'm doing it. Yeah. To me, there's just too much value in being certain of a path back to relevancy. People just underestimate how much variance there is when you go down the depths that the Rockets have these last few years. I mean, there's perpetual rebuilds like what we've seen from the Kings and the Timberwolves the last 20 years. There is no guarantee, even if you have all this young talent, that it's going to come together. The guys are going to be complementary, that they're going to develop in the right way. If their confidence is constantly being shot, if they don't have the right veterans around them to help them, there's considerably more risk than people think. It's not just about the talent. When you have Durant and Harden in that scenario, there is so much value in your floor being insanely high. Day one, you are relevant. Day one, you are on national TV all the time. People want to follow that team because, worst case, you're going to be really, really interesting. There's a lot of value in putting your young players in that environment. I don't think the Lakers regret going to get LeBron James in 2018 when I don't think anyone really considered them on the verge at that time. Everybody knows that LeBron largely did it for off-court reasons and the LA market. Look how quickly it all came together. And of course, that put them in position to get AD a year later. If you have this young talent and then you have Kevin Durant and James Harden, even if it doesn't all come together immediately, okay, then you're going to be a hot button destination for all sorts of guys who would be interested in playing with two all-time legends. To me, when you consider, even with the young talent the Rockets have right now, there's so many questions. Eliminating those questions and just immediately jolting yourself back to relevancy, throwing all the culture BS aside and getting back into, there's almost no price that is too high. I guess I wouldn't, I certainly wouldn't mortgage the farm, and that you certainly have 4 blue chip assets: Jalen, Jabari, Şengün, and whatever your pick in this year's draft is. I wouldn't go, certainly not 3 or 4 of them, and I would be hesitant to go more than one if you're also including all those Brooklyn assets, which, as we talked about, are very valuable to them. That'd be a big part of why the Nets would be incentivized to deal with the Rockets. You could even talk me into 2 if I could choose, who the second is. And maybe it's that, the 2023 pick doesn't end up being all that great if you fall to maybe 5 or 6 in the order. Or, we'll see the way Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. finish this season. There's a lot of ways that you can go. But if you're talking about both of those guys, that's basically the scenario of the Clippers in 2019 when, them doing the Paul George trade meant that they got Kawhi Leonard as well. Yeah, it's tough for me to envision, even if they're a few years older. Again, this is an NBA where I don't think age is quite the same thing it was a few years ago. It'd be really, really hard for me to say no to that. It's more a question of, can you offer the infrastructure, be it, the supporting cast, the coaching, the GM, the ownership, all the connections that you would need to appeal to guys like Kevin Durant and James Harden, who have so many options. But if theoretically you could, yeah, there's almost no price that's too high. I would be, even if on paper, you shouldn't deal blue chip prospects that young, there's so much value in certainty. And I think that's something that really Rockets fans
Yeah.
should appreciate even more, given the way this season is going.
Yeah, I would also say that the Rockets are actually in a, so if they wanted to do that, if this specific scenario where Harden and KD want to get back together as a duo, I think the Rockets are one of the only teams that can do it. They
Yep.
have the connection to James Harden to make that work. I'm not sure James Harden's being as willing to do that if he's going to, I don't know, Detroit or Orlando, for example, the other teams that do have that level of cap space. So I think the Rockets are in a pretty, unique position to make that work. That being said, I would also add, on top of what you already said, that there's so much that, specifically with these players, which funnily enough, they actually get a part of the archetype that our young players here already have. How much could Jalen Green learn from James Harden?
Yep.
Just from being on his team. Look at how good Cam Thomas is. I know he didn't get much of a chance when James Harden was there, but James Harden helped him. Tyrese Maxey was helped by James Harden as well. Like, there's a lot that James Harden can give to Jalen Green as a shooting guard prospect, as a scorer, that Jalen Green just desperately needs, that he hasn't been developing over the last year and a half in a lot of these scenarios. The specifically, and not to get too into it, specifically the just recognizing when you have a mismatch and just saying, everybody get out of the way, I'm going to score here 8 out of 10 times, which is a tangent that I won't go on. And KD and Jabari Smith, I mean, I don't need to say much else. How much could KD teach Jabari Smith? He's not going to make him KD Jr., but he could teach him, I would say, a lot. Going to the second scenario, though, so we don't linger too long, and this is probably already going to be a really long podcast. The second scenario I have is the same scenario. Would you do it? And I think this is a pretty quick answer. Would you do it if Harden's out of the equation, if you were just trading for KD without Harden?
Probably not.
Okay, sure. I agree. I wouldn't do it just for one of them.
Yeah, and that's where, like, a lot of the concern on Twitter comes from. It's like, well, if you add KD, no, there's a way the Rockets could add KD and someone else. Now, the reason I say probably, I mean, maybe there's a world in which there's a star that's not Harden that unexpectedly comes available. Yeah, I agree. It can't be just KD adding him to the current roster. You would have to have a clear plan for what you do with him, because KD alone would not give the immediate jolt that, giving up those types of assets, that you would need for it to be justifiable.
Yeah, a lot of it also comes from, I think, a lot of people would say James Harden alone. A lot of the appeal with that is the fact that James Harden would come as a free agent. You wouldn't need to give up the picks to do so. With KD, you have to invest a little bit more to bring him in, and he by himself is not as big of a floor raiser as James Harden is, just because of the playmaking aspect of it. KD by himself is not as appealing as James Harden by himself, I would say. But now we got that one out of the way. The next one is, what about the Rockets getting involved as in a potential 3-team trade where KD is going to a third team? That third team is giving Brooklyn young assets, perhaps a young player, call it, I don't know,
Yes.
whoever you might imagine. And the Rockets are giving the picks to Brooklyn to get that young player. And important detail, the question this time is, that's a young player coming to the Rockets, because the next question I'm going to ask is if it's just picks going to the Rockets, which is something that Lexington mentioned as well. But just a player. It's just, call it Scotty Barnes, call it LaMelo Ball, call it, I don't know, whoever young player you might think. And I know fit matters, but if it is one of those young star type prospects, would you help Brooklyn out in that they get to rebuild?
I'll actually do both of those in one. Yes, for the player, most likely no for the pick package. I'll never say 100% no, because it depends on what the picks are. But if it's more draft assets, I'm more inclined to just sort of stick with Brooklyn, whose outlook without KD would be so murky. And if you control every single year, then yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it's not that hard to be, 500 and relevant if you try. But honestly, all it takes is one off year. And so, I would probably say the course and say, you know what, one of those 4 years, because a swap right is just as valuable as an outright pick. And we're talking about the odds of getting one really, really high. I would say the course if it was a pick, but it's tough to find a worse outlook than Brooklyn in that scenario in terms of just, they'd basically be in no man's land. They wouldn't have a ton of cap flexibility. They wouldn't have much in the way of young talent that players would really want to team up with. They would just be in sort of purgatory. And the odds are, in my opinion, one of those 4 years, or maybe just the flattened lottery odds help you out. But if it's a young player, yes, I would do it for a Scotty Barnes, a LaMelo Ball type, because what I do think we're seeing is that bad habits matter. We're seeing that even just with your first and second year prospects right now, other than Alperen Şengün, there's so many questions. Whereas if you bring in someone who can help you in the short term, obviously the ideal would be the Durant and Harden scenario that we've been talking about. But even if it's not quite to that level, then yeah, there's still a lot of value in sort of expediting the timetable, if you will, and not just pushing it off. Because if you wait too long, then some of these bad habits, the confidence that I don't want to say is shattered, but at least at times it gets dampened. You can clearly see that on the court. Then that can have a material impact on who they develop into long term. Whereas if you bring in one of those players long term and it makes you more relevant in the short term, even if it doesn't give you the bump that the Durant Harden scenarios do, then I would do it because I do think it helps you with guys like Jalen and Jabari that may need a little bit of a bump in their development.
Yeah, I agree. Both on the player and both on not doing for the picks. I think Jackson was arguing earlier that, Brooklyn could just choose to be mediocre, but then the argument is any team that you eventually get the picks from can choose to be mediocre. You could argue that the Nets are more competent as a front office than the potential team that you might get the picks from. And to be specific, what Jackson mentioned was just getting the package we just got for James Harden, just reset the timeline with another team and give Brooklyn back their picks. I actually think on average, the average team won't collapse as quick as Brooklyn has, and so it's less chances of getting one of those high-end scenarios. In worst case scenario, they could just do the same thing you're worried that Brooklyn might do. So just the same value in one of the arguments is to capitalize on the value of the picks being so high. Well, I would try to capitalize on that value some other way that doesn't involve taking another gamble, because I think we've actually been pretty fortunate in how quick the Nets have fallen apart. Next one, and this is the hard one. I think it's not a question that you would still do it if the Rockets got Victor, because I think it's just at that point he just plugs right into the center position. You can still do whatever you want. Would you still do it if the Rockets landed the number 2 pick and got what is called you would? Damn, we disagree finally.
Yeah, I would, simply because. So are we talking about? Wait, hold on. Maybe I jumped in too early. Are you talking about actually trading Scoot Henderson as part of the deal?
No. I'm saying if you land number 2 in the draft and now you're in a position where you have Jalen Green and Scoot, and you're bringing in KD and James Harden.
Yeah, would you still do like a, Brooklyn pick package plus, Şengün, Jalen, or Jabari, basically?
Yes, for KD and James Harden comes along, yes.
Yeah, yes, I would still do it. I don't really buy this scenario with Harden. I know some will say, well, is there enough basketballs to go around? Look, we saw Harden and Chris Paul coexist on the basketball court beautifully. And no, I don't buy the idea that what ultimately happened in terms of their breakup, I don't think it really had that much to do with basketball philosophy at all. I think it had to do, Chris Paul's off-court personality was a bit grating, and more than anything, I think James just thought that Chris was washed as a player. I don't think it had to do with tension in terms of who's initiating the offense or not. So even though Scoot Henderson's a point guard, and then you factor in James Harden, of course, he's still a double-digit assist guy. I trust them to figure it out. To me, there's so much value from the certainty. Scoot Henderson is a very good prospect, but to me, he's not. It would have to be. I don't know if it exists, a scenario that would be just, especially after this season. I don't think that there's. I mean, maybe with Victor, but the talent would just have to be insanely overwhelming for me to pass up the Durant Harden scenario. And I'm just not quite there with Scoot, especially because we have, again, seen Harden coexist with a point guard in the past. It's not unprecedented. So that's why even with Scoot, I'm still doing it.
Interesting. I would not do it because first of all, I'm that high on Scoot.
Okay.
I think he's just one. I think he's the best point guard prospect or one of the best prospects in the last decade. I'm extremely high on him. So that's why I would not do it, because even though James Harden can coexist with Scoot Henderson, if you're bringing in, even if you bring in James Harden and KD and you have Jalen Green or Şengün, whichever one you keep from dealing, I think at that point you have to deal one of them. It's just from the perspective of, I think, as opposed to right now, bringing James Harden in without Scoot, it would take touches away from Jalen or Şengün, for example. But the team needs a guy like that, right?
Mhm.
Jalen Green cannot, he's not at the point yet in his career where he can just lead an offense by himself.
Yeah, he's not an
And
engine.
he's not an engine. I think Scoot Henderson is an engine. I think year one he can come in and not be an all-star, of course, but he can come in and be that engine for this team. And at that point, I would rather keep the assets from Brooklyn and build around Scoot, Jalen, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, and Şengün organically, because at that point, if you get Scoot, my faith in this working out long term increases dramatically. And so that risk you said, and I agree with you that typically people undervalue just getting back to relevancy. I'm just that confident that Scoot can be the
Okay.
engine that brings us back there. And so at that point, I think you have the potential you have with the lineup I just listed while keeping the Nets picks.
Yeah.
I think it will speed our rebuild so much that we'll be in an extremely awesome position, if not
Yeah.
by the end of next year, somewhere shortly after. And
Yeah.
I would rather just stay the course at that point.
Yeah. I'll just say that perhaps I'm a bit jaded right now because this year with Jabari Smith Jr., a guy who's supposed to be, an elite shooter. And I know that it's so young in his trajectory. I mean, there's plenty of guys. Kevin Durant shot 29% from three when he was a rookie, and look what he is now. I'm not panicking over Jabari. I'm just saying that even highly touted draft prospects, nothing is for certain. There's so much more variance than we like to think going into these rebuilds. That's what the last couple of years has taught me. And so that's why, even with Scoot, I'm still open-minded to it.
Okay. So
So is that
I
is
think
that
those
it
are
for your
all.
hypotheticals?
Yep, those are all
Okay.
my hypotheticals.
So as we transition to the more Rocket-centric portion of this episode, as we try and wind down, we're going to talk a little bit about the roster as it stands, more micro, less macro. This is more the Kevin Durant, James Harden hypotheticals. That's more just long-term team building. What scenarios would you look at to really do something that drastic to try to expedite your timeline to that extent? When is it worth it? That's more of a big picture discussion. That's something that's likely to face Rafael Stone and the Rockets front office this summer. At least we hope it does. If that option is there, it's only good to have those types of options available to you in a summer where you have so much salary cap flexibility. What I will say is that in the short term, this does impact my willingness to explore certain deals this week. I was already sort of bearish on the Rockets doing anything significant. We had the report about, John Collins and the Hawks. Although since then I've talked to some people from the Rockets, it sounds more like that interest was from the Hawks end than the Rockets. And I believe that's actually how Kelly Iko phrased it in his article. If you read it closely, it was the Hawks reaching out to the Rockets about that, not the Rockets reaching out to the Hawks. And now with these types of scenarios presenting themselves, the Harden whispers have been there for months now. And all of a sudden, Kevin Durant, it's not just Kevin Durant himself. Even if KD can't be convinced to go to the Rockets, then there's all sorts of scenarios where because of you owning those Brooklyn picks, you can get involved as a third-team facilitator, maybe get you a Scotty Barnes, LaMelo Ball type, as you were saying earlier. There's just so many options that it has me very hesitant to go for the types of guys that are going to be available at this deadline potentially. John Collins, certainly, even though he's a great, 3-and-D guy, I'm not even sure if I would go for OG Anunoby at this point. To me, the value of flexibility for the Rockets in the aftermath of all this Brooklyn instability is even more important. So because of all the options that we've been talking about for the last hour or so, I'm a bit more hesitant to do anything of significance this week that takes back long-term salary. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think especially with what just happened with Kyrie, it's as tough as this might be to hear for some Rockets fans, because we've been doing this for a while. flexibility just became the name of the game again, because there's a lot of instability in a lot of what-if scenarios that could face the organization between now and the end of the next offseason. It used to be just the draft, and it's a big one at that. But when you consider, it's the draft and the value of the Brooklyn picks, and if the value of the Brooklyn picks is sky high, the Rockets will naturally be more open to dealing them, if not for KD, just for any star they might ask out in general. I've pretty much put away any, not expectation, but any, or hope, I don't think either of those are the correct word, but any scenarios where the Rockets are buying in this deadline, if that makes sense, with one exception. I could see them not buying, but kind of exchanging Eric Gordon perhaps for someone who fits a need better, someone like a Patrick Beverley, or someone who, if you can get them for cheap enough, I think.
But Beverley has an expiring contract, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I mean. Someone that perhaps fits a role that you need more, instead of a wing, because we have so many of them. Perhaps a point guard, perhaps Patrick Beverley, perhaps Monte Morris, or perhaps DeLon Wright, for example. Some of these, very low-profile point guards that just do their job, and have not like very short-term. That they do have very short-term contracts that you could very easily move off of if need be. Nothing of the scale of a Collins, and specifically the one I like the most in Patrick Beverley. He'd actually be expiring, so at that point you're not giving up any flexibility. So yeah, and when it comes to the Rockets actually going out and acquiring talent in this deadline, I've basically just put away any of those scenarios.
Yeah, I agree. This makes the mid-tier scenarios of the types of guys that are expected to be available at this deadline, because I suppose you never say never, because Kyrie, this all happened in the last 48 hours. But other than that, there's nothing that suggests that a true star is going to be available. That stuff is more likely to happen in the offseason. So because of that, to me, it really makes it less likely, if you're the Rockets, to try and go after a more mid-table type guy, unless it's someone that you feel 100% that would have positive trade value. But you better be damn certain about that, because again, they're set up really, really well now, and so I don't think they want to jeopardize that in any way. I don't want to say it's impossible, but especially if some of the rumors that have been out there in recent days about the Hawks trying to deal Collins for some time, I'd be very hesitant on him in particular, simply because if you get someone this week, you want to feel pretty confident that it's someone that, if they're not expiring, it's someone that you could easily offload that would have positive trade value in the summer if something better comes along. Because right now it's a clear reminder that yes, there's bigger possibilities that are likely going to be ahead the next few months. So for me, it's more about just the obvious roster consolidation that we've talked about throughout the season, and freeing up more minutes for Tari Eason's the obvious candidate given his continued breakout, and lately with some of Jabari's issues, we've got to see him step into a bigger role, and he's continued to flourish. So Gordon is the obvious candidate, and the good news for me is that with his recent play, I know they just lost back-to-back games. Before that, the Rockets had actually won 2 straight games and 3 out of 5, and with Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green both out, you got to see Eric Gordon, taking on a bigger role, and he's scoring, he's defending, and even the Rockets look competent. Even a team that is the worst in the NBA this season, with Eric Gordon featured, they were relevant. They actually had, I believe, the 8th rated defense in the league over those 5 games. And so I think that's a good reminder that Eric Gordon can swing a playoff series. He's really that valuable as a role player. He's someone, even at 34 years old, you can trust. And perhaps the same, we talked about the sports science earlier, and the aging cycle being a bit more prolonged now than what fans are used to. That could benefit Eric Gordon as well. His contract also has a ton of flexibility because there's a team option for next year. So hopefully that builds his market to where you can either get a first, which the Rockets have reportedly long sought, or at least a very, very good second. But I also don't think that you deal him just to deal him. I mean, I think that the case is clearly there. And if I had to bet, I do think a deal gets done, because his recent play should remind teams around the league. Again, it's a wide open league, and there's lots of teams that can make a serious title run, and Eric Gordon can be a difference maker. But if you're the Rockets, again, you don't want to take back bad money. The scenario where you don't do anything and Eric Gordon just rolls off your books, or quite frankly, you have either the flexibility to let him roll off, or you bring him back as a role player, perhaps around James Harden. That's been reported that there's a link there. That's better than dealing Eric Gordon just to deal him for, say, a second-round pick that's not good and a contract that you might not be able to easily offload in the summer. There is a need to consolidate. There are players that the Rockets need to play more, but honestly, if you can't deal Eric Gordon for what I think his value should be, then there's other ways you can do it. We've talked about increasing Tari Eason's minutes. Okay, at some point there's going to be a logjam at the forward spots, and that could be even more so after whatever player you bring in the 2023 draft lottery, assuming you're not at number 2, which is only a 13% chance. You've already got Jabari, you've already got Tari Eason. Is there room for both KJ Martin and Jae'Sean Tate long term? Me personally, I would much prefer to keep KJ based on his age, and I just think he's a cleaner fit with the roster as you have it now. I also think Jae'Sean Tate at 27, he's more ready-made with his defense to sort of plug and play for a number of contenders right now. Of course, the flip side of that is that from a Houston perspective, I guess the upside of Tate is that he's on a very, very friendly contract, which he signed last summer. With KJ, it remains to be seen what he would agree to for his next deal. Only Rafael Stone truly knows based on the conversations they've had to date. So that plays into it as well. It's not just about the on-court fit. It's also about the economics of it as well. And perhaps Tate at a much friendlier contract, maybe that changes the math a little bit. But I do think that if you can't move Eric Gordon for what you want, and or if moving him requires taking back money that would make you apprehensive over the offseason, then you do still need to consolidate. It would be helpful to build up your asset of future first-round picks because, of course, after this year, the Rockets do have those Brooklyn picks. But first off, you could look at trading them, as we were saying. And also, the Rockets aren't going to have their own picks from 2024 to 2026 due to the CP3 rush trade, those obligations coming back into play with some light protections. So, yeah, I do think it'd be beneficial to not only clear up minutes in the short term for guys like Tari Eason, but also in the long term to sort of build up your asset stockpile, especially with, there's a decent chance you end up, be it Victor or a guy like Brandon Miller, you end up getting, another front court piece in the draft anyway. So as I look at it, Eric, KJ, and Jae'Sean, I don't want to say that, you have to trade one of those guys, but I think you should be actively exploring all three markets. KJ's the guy of those three that I would definitely like to deal the least, that I would most like to return. But I just think you sort of have to look at the pros and cons of each of those scenarios and then, take the deal that makes the most sense. I mean, I know that's sort of, an easy way out, but the fact is it's hard to have too hot of a take because, again, we don't know exactly what the offers are out there. I think you have to be open-minded. But it's just, to me, those are the three guys you have to look at. I think Eric, because of his age, because of his contract, makes the most sense to deal. And if I had to bet, I still think he's the most likely to be dealt. But I just think it's a fail-safe. Rather than make a bad deal for Eric, you should be looking at those other two guys as well. And then, as you get closer to the final 24 hours on Wednesday and Thursday, that's when you make your decision.
Yeah. So I wanted to just mention something. Eric Gordon's been, balling out the last 3 games, and it just kind of reminded me that when he's gone, I actually think I'm gonna be kind of sad because I know I have a lot of gripes with him right now because of him playing over the young guys, because of him not caring much. But man, he's a damn good basketball player. And people sometimes forget he was on a star route early in his career that was derailed by injuries. And when he came to Houston, he played this role and he did what he was asked to do to a T. I'll be happy. So that there's a personal side of it in which I'll be happy to see him play on a good team again, because a lot of people he's been not only by the fan base, but even when you talk about Eric Gordon, sometimes I'll go ask another team's fans.
He's undervalued.
What would you give up for Eric Gordon? He's pretty undervalued. Like, people disrespect Eric Gordon and how good he is.
I don't find it bleeping funny, personally.
Fair enough. So I wanted just to mention that. And when it comes to just Rockets standpoint, I would do. The Lakers have their picks in 2025 and 2027. I am fairly certain their own second round picks. I would do Eric Gordon for those two and Patrick Beverley as salary filler right now if that were an opportunity. But if not, between KJ and Tate, I actually don't really buy the argument about Tate's contract being more team friendly, just from the perspective of, yes, it is more team friendly, or it is more long-term team friendly, but it's only by 1 year because his extension kicked in this year. So
yeah, that's true. So there are only 2 years left.
Yeah,
So there's
totally.
basically just one more year than KJ, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yep, exactly. And so I would rather move Tate. Just from a plug and play standpoint, I know he brings to this team a lot of things that they don't have without him. But I think that will also change pretty drastically next offseason because the team's going to change so much that a lot of the winning habits, like pushing the ball quicker, like the hustle and all those things, those are going to be injected onto the team via getting better players. Getting better point guard is going to make the pace of this team go up. KPJ is, not really a point guard, and that's one of his flaws. One of the big things Tate brings is pushing the ball up the floor quicker. A lot of these intangibles that Tate brings are going to come regardless of him, I think. Next offseason when they inject some veteran leadership onto this team. And so while I admit that he makes a big difference right now, I don't think that will be the case, and he won't be as necessary next offseason. And so if you can get ahead of the curve and deal him now for a good return, I don't know what a good return for Jae'Sean would be. Perhaps a late first, a lottery protected first, perhaps. I'm not even really sure what I would ask for Tate, but I think that's around what I would be looking for, especially since his contract is so short, or so not short, so cheap. I was looking to moving him. KJ, we're not in the room to know how these extension talks are going. If he's willing to sign for anywhere between 10 and 14 million, I'd say just sign him long
Okay.
term, especially if it comes with team control. Just because I think that's going to be really cheap role player money by the time that extension kicks in, which would be after next season. So yeah, from that perspective, if those are the numbers that are being discussed, I'll just sign them and trade Jae'Sean. If he's looking for 18 to 20 million at that point, even with the upside and the fit that he has with our current guys, I would look to move him because it looks like it would be just a case of selling high. And if you're not gonna and if you're not gonna sign him to an extension, then if you're not gonna trade him now, you're gonna trade him next offseason. And next offseason his value will be distressed, so you might as well get
Mhm.
ahead of the curve and deal him now. But ideally, I would deal Gordon, and I would actually explore dealing both Gordon and Tate if
Okay.
if you can find a good deal for them. Just because, as I said, next offseason vets are going to come in. A lot of guys that we expect to get roles won't be getting roles. If we're looking to be a good team,
Yeah.
it's not only not going to be an 11-man rotation like it is right now, and we still don't play some guys.
Right.
Not only it's not going to be an 11, it's actually not going to be 10, and probably not 9 either. It's going to be an 8 or a 9, maybe 9, but it's going to
Yeah.
be an 8 or a 9-man rotation, and it's going to be really top heavy. And the guys even the guys at the lower end of that rotation a lot of these guys either won't play or will play really
Right.
limited roles.
Well,
So
and the last question I was going to bring up for this episode, because I know we're running a little long, I was going to ask if there's anyone else on the roster that you would look at dealing. And the obvious answers to me are Usman Garuba, who seems to, for whatever reason, have fallen back out of the rotation in the favor of Bruno Fernando of late, and perhaps Josh Christopher as well, although Josh is going the other direction. He's actually taken advantage of the injuries to Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green and is playing better the last few games. But I think, those are the types of guys, as opposed to just letting an asset just deteriorate by not playing in Houston. And that's going to get only more pronounced as you add in more veterans and another draft pick in the offseason. You may have to think, even if it's just, a decent second round pick, that might make more sense. It goes back into that theme of consolidation. I've even seen some suggest Kevin Porter Jr., but I would not go that far. Even if you're down on KPJ, just keep in mind he's going to have a lot of value for you next year as an expiring salary filler, even if you don't like him as a basketball player. So I would not move KPJ. I would not go there. I'd wait for his contract to go up, and then he opens up a lot of possibilities for you. But I would look beyond the three of Gordon, Tate, and KJ. I would look at Usman and Josh Christopher as well. And so I would say, of the three salary, well, I guess KJ isn't a salary guy, but let's say the three consistent rotation guys and the two second-year prospects that aren't consistently in the rotation, I would say a reasonable week for Rafael is if you find one deal from each of those groupings. And who knows, maybe you find more deals than that. You mentioned possibly trading both Gordon and Tate. I think that would be, depending on the return, potentially a home run, given the fact that you have so much potentially incoming and all that flexibility. But I think a reasonable goal would be to sort of have one trade in each tier to help you out with some of your long-term roster consolidation issues. To this point, the Rockets really have not made any transactions at all this year. So this is an opportunity to do it. Everybody's eligible to be dealt. And so as I look at it, besides the obvious guys, Usman and Josh are the other two that I think should be considered as you try and hopefully position yourself for this crucial offseason.
Yeah. So if I were to set expectations or just going into it grades, I would actually. So Josh, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't move him quite yet because I think his value right now is at rock bottom. I don't think one game changes much. And he hasn't played all season. I actually think his value might, if anything, if since it can't go down, if anything, it might go up with more reps to end the season. We don't know what the tanking battle will dictate for the last few games of the season. He might have a week and a half where he's getting, for some reason, Jalen Green is quote unquote banged up, and if Josh is playing out there and he's averaging, I don't know. Like,
that's a good point.
16 and 4 or something like that on good efficiency.
Yeah, if you go into Operation Shutdown to try and maximize your, Victor and Scoot odds, then that may be an opportunity for a guy like that to sort of bolster his value. Yeah. And I guess there's also no financial cost keeping around. That's the other thing. It's like, the other guys, there's potentially a financial cost to having them on your books. Whereas a guy like Josh, he's at such low a figure that it's not like it really affects your, off-season priorities and ability to make moves anyway.
Yeah, but I actually say that about Josh, but Garuba, I would actually look to see if there's anyone out there that might value him more than you do, just because Garuba's actually played the season, right? So, and he's shown, hey, perhaps some surprising ability from the 3-point line. He's shooting 46%, obviously on extremely low volume, but he's shown some potential. That he's shown he's actually played, so he might have more value now than he'll have at the end of the season, should he not get those minutes. So I would say a good trade deadline is moving one of Gordon, KJ, or Tate. And then a home run or a really good deadline is moving two of those or one of those and group if you can get a good deal. Just liquidating some assets because we have a lot of guys that have just turned into players. I would say that's basically what a good deadline looks like to me. And then besides those guys, I would mention this is a joke, but I would mention waiving Jae'Sean Tate would be a pretty home run move.
A home run move just to get him off the roster.
Just get Jae'Sean Tate out of here. I'm not gonna get into it, but
Trevor Hudgens fan club.
Not even Trevor Hudgens. Ty Washington deserves a shot. That voter's money, dude.
Well, yeah. I mean, Ty's the obvious beneficiary, but shoot, even putting Trevor Hudgens into the former Ty Washington role. I mean, it's got to be better than right now.
People are saying just so we know how low the standards have gotten on Rockets Twitter. I was complaining about him starting not this last game but the game before. And people were like, "Oh, he was actually decent the last 2 games that he started," and I'm like, "No, he wasn't. Our standards are just so low with him that we think it's a good game. He was something like 7-4 and 4 on 28% shooting. Our standards are just so low that him just making a 3 to begin a game or having a couple of assists in the first quarter, we're like, oh my God, he's having a good game. No, this is literally one of the worst NBA players out there. And it's not his fault, but the fact that we give him 30 minutes a game when we have a first-round pick on the bench that actually has shown some promise and is way more plug and play if even for the future plans. Yeah. Just so triggering that he's reaching Daniel House levels of just me disliking him as a player, and it's not even his fault. He's just bad, but it's not because I'm not mad because he's bad. I'm mad because we're choosing to play him over someone else.
So my closing thoughts, and I'll let you leave off with whatever you want to leave off with as well. I think it's very important this week, from the perspective of the fan base, this is a quality over quantity league. We say that all the time when it comes to basically 4 quarters not equaling $1. The quality of a true star is better than the quantity of 3 or 4 decent role players in almost all cases. That same logic also should apply to what a GM does. So don't get bogged down in the minutia of, if the Rockets trade Eric Gordon, well, what did they get relative to what allegedly they could have gotten had they dealt him a year ago when he was a year younger and shooting a bit better from 3-point range? Let's say they get hypothetically a pick that's in the early 30s this year instead of one that would have been in the 20s last year. In the grand scheme, is that really that big of a deal? And I think the same thing applies if you offload Usman Garuba for a second. I'm sure there's some will say, well, he was a first-round pick, and now you're trading him for an asset that's less than that. Well, sometimes picks don't work. There's inherent risk. There's volatility. At the end of the day, those are not big misses. What you're trying to do this week is really build your roster and organize it in a way that's beneficial to the development of your young guys in place. For example, more minutes for Tari Eason, who is clearly taking advantage of his opportunities of late. And then more than that, set you up financially and from a roster perspective, be it signings, trades for this crucial summer that we've been talking about, that the Rockets could easily be in the game for Kevin Durant and James Harden, even two of the best players of all time. It's not that unfathomable, in my opinion. There's a reason why we spent nearly an hour talking about it. Those are way, way more important than do you take a slight loss on Eric Gordon or Usman Garuba? And it may not even be a slight loss. Again, some of this is reporting, as opposed to us, having any concrete idea in the case of, Gordon talks now versus a year ago. So I would just say, don't lose the forest for the trees. Don't get bogged down in the minutia of, is this a win or a loss for Rafael Stone? Because the big picture is what matters. There is a much bigger plan for the Rockets in the weeks and, well, I shouldn't say weeks, the months ahead, and how the Rockets set themselves up for that, both in terms of developing the players on their current roster and deals they can make this summer. That's way more important than the exact terms of the guys they might offload this week. And with that, I will, I guess, adjourn my commentary.
I'll touch on what you said with, would you rather have Ben Simmons, what's not Tyrese Maxey because he was not on the deal. Would you rather have Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, and a couple of Sixers picks, or would you rather have the Nets picks after two of their stars have already left? I think it's a big one.
Yeah.
Would you? Or no, not really. Would you rather have Ben Simmons and those picks, but also have a couple extra late first-round picks that would have gotten for Eric Gordon and I don't know, Karis LeVert?
Mm-hmm.
Or would you rather not have those picks and have the Nets picks right now? That's one of the things that I would mention. And then besides that, manifesting Jabari Smith finding his shot again, it's starting to get concerning. We've seen a bigger volume of him not being a good shooter in the NBA than we've seen of him being a good shooter in college. And I know he was a good shooter in high school. You don't need to bring it up again. I'm just saying, what most people have seen, we've seen a bigger volume than that of him not being a great shooter.
Again, that's why, as I mentioned earlier, the certainty of, the Harden and Durant paths has more value to me now. When a guy like Jabari, that's the one skill that he's supposed to be elite at. And to see him struggling to the extent that he is, I know it's a small sample, but it's also a reminder of, just how unpredictable this all is.
Yeah. And the last thing I would bring up is go watch some Scoot Henderson and Victor Wembanyama highlights, because those guys are insane. And I've been picking back up on scouting the last week and a half or so, and it's just, you get one of those guys and you're not fixing, you're not getting back to even. No, you're getting way beyond even when it comes to rebound if you get one of those guys. So we have a fairly decent chance of getting one of them. I'll leave you with the thought of I don't know, Scoot Henderson, Jalen Green, Tari Eason, Jabari Smith, and Alperen Şengün. And one last thing. Mark Stein, I think it's Mark Stein. Am I Yes, it is Mark Stein. Just reported that, and I quote, it's a report that confirms that one of Joe Tsai's presumed objectives in a Kyrie trade was to not send him to his preferred destination with the Los Angeles Lakers. So I'll leave you with that one, and I'll see you after the deadline. Hopefully with a little bit of a more optimistic outlook.
Yeah, anytime you see an owner step in that is making decisions for non-basketball reasons, which at least in part that would be, it sounds like, out of spite, then that can only be to the benefit of a team like the Rockets that owns Brooklyn's draft assets through 2027. So any owner stepping in that kind of situation, I think that's a pretty optimistic note to leave on if you're a team like the Rockets that controls their draft, right?
Yeah, it's from a macro standpoint, there's not a lot needs to go right for it being one of the best positions in the league, and that's part of what comes with tanking. It's very volatile. The day-to-day sucks, But when they stop playing the awful basketball that they're playing right now, even if it's just for the offseason, and we take a step back, we'll be a lot happier with what we see.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, with that, we can finally bring this to a close. Thanks to all of you that made it through this marathon episode. But again, there's a lot to go into, both in terms of the Rockets' current roster, as well as what the Kyrie Irving trade means for the long-term outlook with regards to the Brooklyn assets that the Rockets own through 2027 in the first round, all those picks and swaps, but also what it could mean if Kevin Durant eventually asks out as soon as this week, but more likely, in my opinion, this summer. And could the Rockets get involved either actually pursuing Kevin Durant or more likely as a facilitator? All it is more options for Rafael Stone and the Rockets. So let's talk about an overall a very positive development when, again, you control Brooklyn's draft assets through 2027. So on that happy note, we will adjourn. For Paolo, I'm Ben. If you want more content before our next episode, which will come out after Thursday, after the deadline, of course, we'll review what the Rockets did or didn't do and talk about how it positions them for the upcoming offseason. Then the best place to get that content from us in the meantime is on Twitter. I'm on there at Ben Dubose. Paolo is on there at Paolo Alves NBA. You can also follow my work at RocketsWire, rocketswire.usatoday.com. That's the USA Today hub covering the Houston Rockets. And of course, I am editor of that blog, rocketswire.usatoday.com. You can check out all the daily coverage. Also, check out our partners over at Sports Talk 790 and Karbach Brewing. Of course, the show brought to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing. Their beer developed in collaboration with the Houston Rockets. You can pick it up at your Houston area stores. You can also learn more about Karbach at karbachbrewing.com. And for Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team where I'm a contributor, check out their daily content at sports790.com. Listen to all their great programming, including the Matt Thomas Show, weekdays from 12 to 3. Matt, of course, is the radio play-by-play voice of the Rockets, so he should have lots of Rockets talk for you this week. Noon to 3 Houston time. You can listen on 790 AM on your dials here in Houston or stream it at sports790.com. With those plugs out of the way, we'll finally break it. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.